Welcome to the EQ Podcast. Welcome to the EQ Podcast, a show focused on equipping ministry leaders within the Calvary Chapel Association in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Zach Lamberson, and with me is Pastor Steve. And we're excited to have on the show today the senior pastor of Revival Church in Grandview, Washington, Joe. How are you doing, Joe? Edwards-Hoff, is that right?
Edwards-Hoff.
Edwards with the S-Hoff.
Yeah.
Joe, my first question is, why do you hate Calvary Chapel?
Yeah, right.
I'm joking, but I did ask him, I gave him kind of a heads up. His church is the Revival Church. And, he is a Calvary Chapel, though. He's in our association. He fellowships with us, but he's not Calvary Chapel Grandview. Why is that?
So there's two reasons. And the first reason is Chuck Smith. And I blame him.
Okay.
And that always gets people's eyebrows raised a little bit. So
My eyebrows are going up right now.
Yeah. So when I moved down to Grandview, I reread Calvary Distinctives. And I was moving down to do a church plant. And I was coming out of a Calvary Chapel, really in my whole, really walking with the Lord life, raised in the church. But it's always been Calvary Chapel. And I'm reading Calvary Distinctives, and at the end of one of the chapters, and I forget which chapter it is, but midway through the book, Chuck talks about, what's great about being Calvary Chapel is that if you're a Nazarene or you're a Presbyterian or a Methodist, people know what you stand for, but with Calvary Chapel, you got to come and find out. And as I moved down here to plant a church, I'm thinking, man, that's so true before the internet. Mm-hmm. And so many people know Calvary Chapel. And, that was something that was just kind of laid on my heart. Like, I like that idea of just a non-denominational church name where people have to come and find out. But when I first started, I started a Facebook group, Calvary Chapel Grandview. And that's actually how I got the thing going, was Calvary Chapel Grandview. Started a Facebook group. And something we'll probably talk about is I ended up merging churches. Mm-hmm. And so then right off the bat, because you're bringing two groups of people together, I didn't want to now let's change the name of your church. Because I was really trying to come at it from the whole, I'm not taking you guys over. We are bringing two groups together and we're going to try and meet in the middle to make this thing work. Doctrinally, we were good.
Was their church called Revival?
So their church was Grandview Christian Church.
Okay.
And so they were Grandview. So we were Grandview Christian Church for a few years of me being the pastor there. Okay. And I had on our Facebook page, I had a whole Grandview Calvary Chapel and Grandview Christian Church come to, and they're both like GCC. It was kind of great. Yeah. Worked out great. So same acronym. And so in the end, though, part of what it was we started to say, look, I think it's time. Let's do the name change. Because people knew that was always going to be a talk. And so the whole is, do you want to do Grandview Calvary Chapel? And part of it was because we brought these two churches together, let's just sit down and talk about, do we want to just come up with a name that's just us? And it still was with leaders and members of the church who came from a non-Calvary Chapel background. Doctrinally, we didn't have any problems, but it was just and so the fact that I feel like that was on my heart at the very beginning, we just started tossing out church names. Mm-hmm. And Revival was another thing that was on my heart. I was reading a lot of books on Revival and just talking about it. It's we have a desire to see Revival in this church, and it really was bringing a dying church back to life, but in our town and community. So at this point, the way I joke with people is, if you're looking for a Calvary Chapel in Grandview, you quickly and easily find us. I'm posting Chuck Smith stuff all the time. I've got the Dove on stuff. So it's kind of, you're looking for a Calvary, you find us.
Yeah.
If you don't know Calvary Chapel, you'd be none the wiser. I mean, you come in and you'll see Calvary Chapel magazine and this and that, but it's one of those, and I did have people actually at the very beginning. It was funny. I had one family come and we were super small, and one new family was a really big deal. And they came and it was and then they found out we were Calvary Chapel and they left. And they had their thing that they, that they were holding on to. But it was just whatever. But, it's kind of fun to watch people come. And I've had people come and it took a couple months before they realized are you a Calvary Chapel? Yeah, we're a Calvary Chapel, oh, okay. But it's kind of fun to watch, people find out as they go. But that's kind of been my thing though lately is if you're looking for a Calvary Chapel, it should be easy to find us.
So is your church the only one that has Revival? Is that what's happening here? I'm just messing with you.
I know. And
you don't have to answer that.
Yeah. I will say this, though, is that, I try and work it into mini sermons. Last Sunday and the Sunday before, just talking about, and always emphasizing my church is, if you guys read the Bible and you read church history, I was it shouldn't be hard for any American church today to look at our congregation and all the ones around us and look at these revived ones and go, yeah, something's missing. And so I'm always emphasizing the need for revival. And so if that's one thing, it's not that we have it, but I try and continually remind us to be looking for it and praying for it.
Now, you before I even get to more of your calling in the ministry, you mentioned you merged two churches, and so can you kind of walk us through what that looked like? Because I know you said you're going to plant a church, and at some point, I'm guessing there was an opportunity to take a church building over, or maybe.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story. So I come down, and so while I start a midweek Bible study at our house. I'm actually driving up the road to Dallas Sandoval's church in Toppenish, and I'm leading worship there. I showed up to just attend, and within the month I was the worship leader. And so, so I'm doing that on Sunday mornings, but I'm down. We started a Tuesday Bible study, and then on Thursdays we were doing a youth study. I had a high school kid over raking leaves, like, let's do a youth Bible study. Sure. Within a few months, our adult study had grown to 6 to 8 people, and we had 30 plus teenagers coming in the middle of the week. So this is what things started as, and within the year, by the end of that year, someone told me that the Grandview Christian Church didn't have a pastor, hadn't had a pastor in years, and they just had people guest teaching, and I thought you might be interested in guest teaching there. So I came and I taught Philemon, one day, one book, and got it done, and it was a nice time, but it was probably about 15 people, and the youngest of them were probably, I think, in their late 50s, the youngest, definitely not the average age. But it went well, and then I got invited back, so I went back again, and after going there a few times, we started talking about, would you consider, and so we started talking doctrine, and there was stuff that we had to hammer out, and some stuff that, it turns out it was a very diverse group. Trying to make a long story short, the Christian churches are cousins of the churches of Christ, and so it's kind of like if you took a Church of Christ and added instruments, that's what the Christian churches were. But one thing I didn't know about churches of Christ and Christian churches is that apart from like baptism and the instruments thing with churches of Christ, autonomy is one of their biggest things, is they're their own thing and there's no one over them. But because of that, they can be very different in doctrine because there's nothing really holding them all together. So you might go to a Church of Christ and find electric guitar someday. And so these guys didn't have like any of the red flags I thought I might. They didn't believe any of that stuff. And they seemed like a good fit. And ironically, the previous pastor they had was Pentecostal. And so I joked with someone, they're like, well, what's his church like? All my old friends from Calvary Ellensburg were asking me, what's his church like? I'm like, imagine a Church of Christ had a baby with a Pentecostal church. They're like, it sounds a little bit almost like a Calvary Chapel. I go, I know, right?
A little bit.
And so it was kind of cool to see how God made things work. So we brought our groups together, and when we started, my wife was the oldest person in our group at like 30 or 31. And then I had a bunch of teenagers with me. And then their group, the youngest. So there was a big gap of over 20 years between the oldest in our group and the youngest in their group. And, it took time, and like everything, I think, things settled. A couple people left. That's just kind of normal in a merge. But I think going back, if I had to tell myself, advice, it's just like, it's going to go a lot slower than you think, but it's going to be worth it. Yeah. And so that's one of the things I learned is just it's a slow process merging groups, but on the flip side, there's a whole lot. Like we ended up with a paid off building, and all these other things. Like, I stepped into a situation that would have taken a long time to build. And so it's kind of cool to see how things worked. And it is. The Grandview Christian Church has got over a 75-year history in the community. So even with a new name and everything like that and new changes, we still like to honor that history as a church. We've got a big hallway with all the pictures all the way from the very beginning until now. And so it was a good way to see a new face and a new turn. I feel like God really did prepare the way, even with that Pentecostal pastor, beforehand. It's just kind of fun to see how, things are being put in place long before I got there.
Mm-hmm. So you came out of Ellensburg, Calvary Chapel, is that right?
Yeah.
What was that called to look, that's when I go back a little bit. Let's draw the curtain back a little bit more. So you came from the Tad's church, and what did that look like? How did he commission you? What was the calling on your life like to go to Grandview, and why Grandview of all places?
Yeah,
I guess?
so, and even taking things even a half step further, I met this pastor at the gym when I was going to college in Ellensburg, and it was this little micro Calvary Chapel church plant that actually never quite took off. But I got to sit under this pastor for a year. Then I was driving 25 miles up to Cle Elum, and I helped serve in children's ministry and worship up there with Dan Renshaw for a couple of years. And then the pastor out of Yakima knew there were people in Ellensburg who wanted a Calvary. So he was coming up leading a Bible study up there. So I've now got 2 years with Tony Magana. And then we were the ones wanting to start the church. So actually, Tad was getting ready to leave for Haiti as a missionary, sold off everything, had his bags packed, and then the door shut. And some people from our group were from Linden, where he was from, and we brought him down. And so we started the church meeting Sunday mornings in Ellensburg just a couple months before I got married in 2009. And so I was there from the beginning, serving and filling all these different roles of a small church start, meeting at the senior center and getting the ball rolling. But right after I got married, I got hired as the shop teacher down at Grandview High School. So 80-mile commute each way.
Oh,
and I did that for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Now, in the midst of that, I started carpooling with an atheist, former Mormon Spanish teacher. He got saved after a year of our commute together. He ended up moving his family down with us at the time to do the church plan and everything. So we kind of came down together, Kyle, to get all this stuff going. But it really was there was a fork in the road after my 4th year. And it was this beautiful timing because I had a homeroom group that they were seniors. After 4 years, they were graduating. And I was offered a job at Ellensburg Christian School. It's like, okay, like I can put down plant roots. I was an elder at this point in Ellensburg. So it's like, here we go. Got a job in Ellensburg. We have bought a home in Ellensburg. Everything's settled.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the door opened, I felt like there's just unfinished business in Grandview. I've been leading a high school Bible study at the high school, public high school, during lunch with 25, 30 kids coming. And so it was this thing like, man, like there's a need here. And I did, as far as I knew, there weren't any verse by verse teaching churches in the area, and so told my wife, it's a big change this year. I'm either going to take a job in Ellensburg, and it's going to be a big pay cut, private school, or it's going to be moving to Grandview. So there was like big change either way. And we prayed about it. And we decided we're going to go to Grandview. So I went and told Tad, broke the news to him. It was bittersweet.
Yeah.
Because I think he felt like, I was a very useful guy. I became I was like his backup teacher at the time. And so we moved down to Grandview and then got the church plant started and all that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Tad's doing good too, so it's good to know his story.
Yeah. He's doing plenty fine without me. Yeah.
So I have a question with your merger. What did that look like practically when you were going through talking to the guys? Did they have a board of elders? Did they? Yeah.
So they had 3 elders and all great guys. One of which is still an elder for me, but these at the time, they were guys, none of them really felt called to be teachers, none of them really felt, but they were men who were invested in the church, godly men, mature men, and so they were holding things together. And, the church was elder-led on paper, congregationally led in practice, because we have 15 people, it's just kind of what happens. Yeah. And so that was one thing when I came, even though I officially started January 1st of 2016, I was still basically an interim pastor until we rewrote our bylaws. So that was one big thing I said I think this is going to happen. It's going to work. But, until we go through these bylaws and kind of work things out. And so we shifted over to a pastor-led model and a few other things along the way. But yeah, so that was a big part of it was, we sat down, we talked doctrine. I mean, I tried bringing up controversial stuff that could be, hiccups or bumps in the road. And, again, some of the people in the congregation didn't all agree on all that stuff either. And so, But in the end, it ended up working out well.
Okay, so when you were talking to these guys, were you telling them, okay, I'm a Calvary Chapel guy, this is where I'm coming from? You were...
Yeah, I mean, and I explained to them, it's basically, because I think it's hard when people don't have a Calvary background and don't understand, a lot of people come from at least the mindset of denominations. Right. And denominations with top-down control and all this kind of stuff. I was like, here's the deal. I kind of explained, because I'm an ordained Calvary Chapel pastor, if I come, we're a Calvary whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. I was joking, but it's true. It's like, if you get me, you're a Calvary one way or the other. And I think some people had a hard time because they didn't want to feel like they were being taken over by a church. But it's like, well, no, like if you want me as your pastor, the affiliation comes with me, because it's not about top-down control. It's just, this is what we're going to teach. This is what we believe. And no one really had questions with the beliefs. Right. I think it was just that fear of, we've had this church for so many years. We didn't want to be taken over by a group. And it's like, no, it's just, being Calvary isn't about being taken over. It's just, this is what we believe. And if you go from one Calvary to the next, you'll hear pretty much the same stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big part of it, was just kind of explaining to them what being a Calvary meant versus some of these other congregations where there's votes and there's, all this kind of stuff that changes. You always hear about, the Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church voting and all these things being passed. And it's like, no, we're not under that. And I even explained to them too. And I think it was a good for them to chew on. It's like, guys, if Calvary goes wacko on us, we're an email away from not being Calvary. I go, that's the freedom we have, is that we're just a group of churches that agree and have the same vision and beliefs, but there's no power trip controls like you might see in a formal denomination.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I would say it kind of happened the other way around. If you have a Calvary that goes wacko, it's an email away from them not being a Calvary
I know,
anymore.
And it's true. That's obviously that's more the case. But you're talking to people who are from the outside, kind of being brought in, trying to explain, it's a easy to break relationship either direction if there's ever a desire. Yeah. So, yeah.
So, Joe, you're, I don't want to say a fan of social media, but I do know that you have a large presence on social media. I am of the ilk that I tolerate it and use it as much as I can for ministry purposes, but that's about as much as I can. And I know you have a philosophy and kind of a mindset towards it. Would you kind of share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, it was funny because I was looking just recently back at my posts in 2015, 14, and I was like, man, I only posted like once a week. Like I wasn't on there very much. And it was kind of funny because I was hoping to find stuff, but I couldn't find things I was looking for because I didn't post that all that often. But when I moved down to Grandview, when I was going to start a church, in fact, I went to the Senior Pastor Conference in 2014, which would have been the first conference after Chuck passed. That was my first Senior Pastors Conference. It was the first one without Chuck. But at that conference, Pastor Tad, he got me a copy of Lectures to My Students by Charles Spurgeon. And I remember just powering through that book and loving it. And there was 2 chapters on open air preaching. And as I look at Grandview in this town of 11,000 people, I'm like, well, Safeway it is then, because I don't know where else I'm going to find anyone walking outside, with any number of people. But jokes aside, I started thinking, social media is where people are. That is where people are congregating. And if you're not in a town that has actual people at a park or something, then the only place I'm going to be able to street preach is going to be on social media where people are gathering. And so at the very beginning when we moved to Grandview, one thing is I used to wake up really early to go to Grandview. Sometimes I'd exercise before going, so I'd have to get up at 4 just to do everything I need to do and get on the road and get to Grandview before school starts. But when I moved down, I just kept the pattern. So I still get up around 4, plus or minus. And during that time, just doing devotions and reading books on revival and books on prayer, E.M. Bounds and all these guys I love to read. I kind of just made this philosophy. If something just hits me, oh, that was good. Whether it was what I read or just a thought, just something kind of goes ooh, like the Lord spoke, post it. And so what surprises people is I don't spend a lot of time on social media. I typically get on, post, and get off. I don't look at anything. I just get on, type that thing up, and back out, and I'm back to reading again. And I'll try and talk to, I'll check my comments, and if people ask a question, I try and get back to them. But it just became this thing of if the Lord speaks to you, share it. And so that just became my philosophy. Every time the Lord speaks to you, share that. Don't just keep it to yourself, unless it's obvious I should keep it to myself. Right? It's share it out. And so I shared a lot, and it doesn't hurt that before I got called to be a pastor, I was thinking about starting a clothing line doing Christian t-shirts. And I had sold them at the Creation Festival, and I'd done online stuff, sold them at the Pastors Conference down in California, actually. I had a booth there. But during that time, I did a lot of research on social media marketing. So on top of just that philosophy of always posting, I also knew a lot about how social media worked and what typically would get more response just as far as, actually getting organic following and things like that. So that helped. And I always went, Laura, did you make me do all that t-shirt stuff just to figure out how to use social media?
Yeah, probably.
That was a long, slow lesson, but if it worked, it worked. And so.
No, I love it. I think, like you said, there's an investment there because that is where the people are. And, we invest, as a church, not heavily in terms of finances, but there's a really cheap way for people, I talk to pastors who want to get on live stream and stuff. And I'm like, well, you need to be on Facebook. I mean, if you're live streaming, that needs to be a place you put your stuff out, even if the production's not that great. I mean, it's free. And same with YouTube. You can put stuff on YouTube that's free. And, we've had a good response from that as well. And so I think just telling guys, especially in smaller communities, this is a great way to exercise outreach and not get caught up in the social media, rounds of it all. But good thing to keep in mind. So afterglows, I know that's something that you've told me in the past you emphasize at your church. You guys do them on Sunday nights, right?
Yeah.
And so you guys do an afterglow pretty much every Sunday night. And I was more curious, like, what does that look like? Are you doing a small teaching still, or is it just worship?
Yeah.
Do you explain the afterglow? Because I imagine you have new people come in periodically.
Yeah, I only explain it periodically and not all that often. And what I will say is I think by doing an afterglow weekly, I find that they are often less eventful sometimes because every week is just different. And sometimes, I always look forward to the Senior Pastors Conference at the Bar M, to the Doing Ministry Well Conference here, usually doing an afterglow. Those are usually amazing. And I think sometimes when it's people coming really expectant, like this is the one time a year that we come together, a lot of times people are really like hungry for something. But that said, what I love about the afterglows at our church, I'll go back and explain it more in a second, but is that some weeks it's just really not much. And then other weeks it's great. And that just seems authentic because it's not like you're going to have bells and whistles all the time.
Yeah.
And so Sunday night we end up doing Sunday nights as our first night service. When I first started there, I just was Sunday mornings, and then we expanded to Sunday nights instead of a midweek. And so our Sunday night is my Through the Bible teaching. I teach for an hour-ish. Emphasis on the ish. Sometimes it's hour 10. But the thing is then we just spend the time of prayer and worship. But it's also open, again, as an afterglow. And I sometimes explain to people, like, this is where it's not just an opportunity for corporate prayer, but a word of prophecy. We had someone share a word of prophecy this last Sunday night, and something I've gleaned from Steve is actually asking, okay, who was that for? And finally someone sheepishly is like, it was me. It's like, okay, here, you go pray for that person. And they're getting prayed for. And I had a couple of my elders, sitting at the front. Hey, if you need prayer, whether it's for a fresh filling of the Holy Spirit or it's just something you need, come on up and get prayer. So, 3, 4, 5 people walking up during those songs. And so a lot of worship, a lot of times it's just corporate prayer, but other things happen during those times too. And some nights I'll push something a little more, like, tonight we're really going to be emphasizing, seeking those fresh fillings and just getting people prayed for who need it. I've had people share out utterances of tongues. It's not that common, and it's just one of those things where words of prophecy, even when the people don't realize they're words of prophecy, I don't know how many times I've had people just pray and it's like, oh, I'm the only one in the know about what's going on in this person's life. And they just hit the nail on the head,
Right.
And so it's cool to see. So it is just how we do closing worship.
And you don't do worship before, right? You just do teaching?
Typically
and then...
just teaching. I might open with a song, depending on the night, just depending on if maybe it's a shorter teaching, I might open with one song. But yeah, typically we go right into the teaching at 6 o'clock. It's usually over around 7, and then we do the rest till 8 o'clock.
And just curious because, I was thinking, okay, we had one week where Steve had to start teaching before we did anything else. In his third service, because he had to take a flight out. So he's going to fly down to the pastors' conference. So we had him teach first. And our church is notorious for coming in 5, 10, 15 minutes too late. Does that happen during teaching? Or people kind of have the expectation, he's teaching right now, we should probably be there.
Yeah, Sunday nights people are a little more punctual. And I think because they know I teach first thing, and maybe that helps when people realize. Every now and then I mix things up. The other week we passed out communion during the first song. And people came up later like, I didn't get communion. It's like, well, church starts the same time every week. Just because I changed the order. But yeah, so it is. People still come in late, but I do think actually people are a little bit more punctual on Sunday nights because, they know the teaching starts first thing. So.
Okay, so if you were going to give any of the guys advice on how to do an afterglow, what would you tell them?
Well, firstly, I'm on really good terms with my worship leader. And that's because I am the worship leader. And it helps. And
he takes all your cues really well.
He's good at it. He's good. This one mind. But for what it's worth, that's a huge thing to me because I know a lot of talented musicians who don't know as much about leading worship. And then I know a lot of worship leaders who might not kind of understand the concept of an afterglow. And so that's something is that, the worship leader is an integral part because if you're playing songs in between stuff, he needs to be able to at least read the room, read the pastor, read what's going on to make sure that it's not just, I have 6 songs to play and so I'm going to play my 6 songs. That's right. So I think that's a really big thing. Not being afraid of silence.
Exactly.
You don't need to play a song when there's silence. Give people some time of silence. I play solo, but I have a synth pad, so it's like there's some background noise there. So it's not just like utter silence, but it's like a keyboard or something else. It's like so there's a little background noise. But yeah, I'll watch a minute go by, a minute and a half, 2 minutes go by, and I'll kind of decide, okay, am I going to play another song, or am I going to keep waiting, or even encourage people, maybe prompt some thoughts or even things to think about. So I think those are big things. And I do think occasionally just reminding people, that this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is your opportunity. And, and reminding people, don't chicken out and don't, don't miss out on this opportunity. And so I think it's good for people to have some healthy ultimatums sometimes of like, well, tonight's your opportunity. If God spoke to you during the message about something, tonight you can do something about that or just stay seated. Like you can respond to God or not. And just kind of like, and I think, people can get saved and respond to God in any way, shape or form in their hearts, in their chair. But a lot of times it helps when people realize like, I went and got prayer. Yeah. I went and prayed with that elder. I raised my hand at the appropriate time. One thing just tossing in here too is, this was something that's a carryover from the Christian churches that we kept, is they do weekly communion. Mm-hmm. So we do weekly communion at my church, and we always have it available Sunday nights as well. So that children's ministry, a lot of people who didn't get it in the morning, they'll have it. So that's another nice thing with the Afterglow is communion's available. So people will come up and take communion during that time too, which is another, I think it's a nice thing having available for those who just take it individually during that worship time. So other things we do.
No, that's good. That's helpful. All right. You ready for the lightning round?
Okay.
So we just talked to you about the fact that you listen to pastors at 1.5 speed, but who would be your go-to guy to listen to that you love to? If you got to listen to one guy, you're on a desert island, and you only had one guy with his tapes. Who is it?
Yeah. If it's one guy, it'd be Joe Foch.
Okay.
If it's one guy, it'd be Joe Foch. I was just telling Pastor Steve, he's, at least recently, he's been the second guy. Him and Joe have been the 2 main guys I've been listening to. And for me, as a pastor, I don't feel like I need much inspiration preaching. I don't really like homiletical commentaries. I like Alan Redpath. There's a couple guys I like, but it's like, for the most part, I need information that I can further research and reword and disseminate to my congregation. And so I like the pastors who are going to tell me things that I did not pick up in a book or so I usually like the nerdier guys. And you're pretty nerdy, Steve. I think
shots
he knows
fired.
it. Yeah.
I can't believe that you put Joe Foch in front of me. I'm a little.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he's okay. But
I love that guy.
Yeah, Joe's, and it is. Some of these guys, it's kind of like, I just read 6 commentaries, and where on earth did you get that from? And so I am friends with his daughter, and she'll go into his library and take pictures of his books for me.
Oh,
so that's one of those,
sweet.
you have to have those friends in low places. And so, but yeah, so he'd be my go-to.
All right. Number 2, what is a good read recently? Not just a good read in general, but something you've read recently that you'd suggest for other pastors to read.
I don't know if I'd recommend to read what I'm reading. It's a lot of hard reading. I'll just say that what I am reading. Okay, a couple books I'm reading right now. I'm rereading for I don't know how manyth time Why Revival Tarries by Leonard Ravenhill. that book was a game changer for me. And then I reread it, and I'm rereading it with a new highlighter color. So I can actually see if just new things that are coming to mind. And I usually tell people to read Preacher and Prayer by Ian Bounds yearly. I always tell pastors, it's a short read. It's not very big. So it's like, tell pastors, read it every year. It's worth reading every year. But on top of that, I'm reading just fun side study. Apart from my own studies, I'm reading Israelology by Arnold Fruchtenbaum right now. That's a nice little 700-page. It was his doctoral dissertation. He knocked it down from 2,000 pages to 700 pages.
Appreciate
to
it.
make it more palatable.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's good though. He's a great guy. So it's that's kind of that's my like intellectual side study. And then, but why revival tarries? And actually, I'm also reading Born After Midnight by Tozer, a book on revival. And so I find I always have one Torrey, Tozer, Bounds, Ravenhill. I mean, one of those guys that are just there to inspire me. And I just always have to have one or two. And I just slowly move bookmarks, and I might not read it every day. I might read one chapter a week, but I'm always moving through those books because they just inspire me and keep me kind of fired up on top of all the intellectual stuff, learning for what I do.
All right. So last lightning round question, emphasis on lightning. No, just kidding. Would be, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's in full-time ministry or looking like God is calling them into full-time ministry?
One bit of advice. That's hard for lightning round now. I think we got to narrow this thing down. In some ways, I'd say, be you, because that's a thing I was just telling someone is that I see people all the time who've never been to a Calvary. I know like during COVID you experience this, so you see it at least a lot, where all these people come to a Calvary, never seen a Calvary, and they hear verse by verse teaching, and it just blows their mind. And you always get to tell them, I came up with that. No, and but it's because they've just never heard someone do verse by verse teaching. But I was telling someone recently, I said, but like Joe Foch, for instance, I said, Calvary pastors are still very broad and across the board, how they teach, how they go through the word. And, we can't try and be Chuck, and we can't try and be Joe or David Guzik or Steve. It's like, at the end of the day, if you're a pastor, find out what your flavor is and what you're going to be. And like me, like I'm into facts and stuff like that. Like I tell my people, listen, when you have the mic, you don't have to talk about history, but I have the microphone and you're going to learn about history, and this is how the battle marathon went. And I start walking them through, and so it's like, that's just me. And so I think that's the thing for all of us though, is that if we try and be someone else, it's just not going to hit. It will not land when you're trying someone else's style. And we can look up to and admire Guzik or these, I always joke about, every beginner, will you teach this Sunday? Sure. Like, are you walking up there with Guzik's notes? Yes. Yeah. They got enduring word commentary notes in front. But it's like, find out who you teach like and what your interests are and roll with that, because God will bring you a flock that, that will bless you for the way he made you. If you're called to the ministry, then you were crafted for the ministry. Yeah. And so God will have you prepared for what you're going to do. And I think there's that temptation of, copying another style, and just be you.
Like it. Appreciate you, Joe. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, and we'll have you on again at some point. We'll make you drive down from Grandview again. So
fair.
All right. God bless, man. The EQ Podcast is here as a resource for our listeners. Check us out at eqministry.com. On our website, you'll find a variety of helpful tools, including past ministry conferences and a contact form to seek out help or counsel from seasoned Calvary pastors who want to encourage you in your serving or answer your ministry-related questions. Until next time, God bless.